Let's take a look at Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. Let's do a little bit of a review before you actually get started on the study guide and start practicing on your own. So for Chapter 6, let's take a look at percents. When we're looking at percents, sometimes we might have a decimal and we have to, sometimes we have a decimal and we want to go to a percent. So if I have 0.638, I turn it into a percent by moving it twice to the right. Remember, it's kind of like timesing by 100, right? Multiplying by 100 because it's percent per every 100. So as a percent, this would look like 63.8%. Now it's the same thing if I want to go backwards. If I want to go from a percent to a decimal. Then I take what I have, 63.8%, and to turn it into a decimal, I'm going to go 2 to the left. So I get 0.638 for a decimal. So now, what if we have fractions? What if we have a fraction and we want to go to a percent? Well, this means we need to take 3 steps. 1, we take our fraction. Let's just say 1/8. I know that's a tricky one for all of us to remember. So we have 1/8. Step 2 is to divide so that we can get a decimal. Remember, we fall in the house. So it's 8 divided into 1. Well, we can't do that just by looking at it. So we're going to have to put a decimal, bring it to the top, add a 0. 8 goes into 10 once, subtract 8, left with 2. Well, still not done, so I add a 0 and bring it down. 8 goes into 20 twice, subtract 6. Still not done, I have a 4. Okay, so now it's a 40. 8 goes into 40 5 times. And now I'm done because I got it down to 0. So step 3 is to take our decimal, just like we did here, decimal to a percent. And we're going to move that decimal 2 places to the right or multiply by 100. And our percent will be 12.5%. Moving these decimals left and right are great, but you don't want to confuse it about which way to go. How I remember it is, well, if I have a number, my percent symbol is always on the right-hand side. So I know I need to move my decimal to the right. Or if I want to go to a decimal, I go away from the percent symbol and I go to the left. So these are some tricks and tips for you to remember when you're solving. Now, a huge important part is when we want to solve percent of change. Try and think if you know about that formula. Try and recall it. Do you really like change? If you're in my class, you'll remember me saying, no, nobody likes change. So I think of it as, with percent of change, let's take this off in this corner. With percent of change, do you like change? No. Do you kind of see the O and the N and the O and the O? Okay, well, this gives us our new minus old divided by old. Then we multiply by 100. And there's our entire formula, because once we use that formula, we'll be able to solve for percent of change, whether it's an increase or a decrease. So let's also write this side note. If it's an increase, you'll get a positive answer. If it is a decrease, you'll get a negative answer. So always ask yourself, percent of change, do we really like change? No. And go from there. Another formula that we want to remember is simple interest. We'll take this to a separate corner. Simple interest is when we want to put things in a bank and it's saying, hey, you will get 5% every year. if you put $200 in right now, so what will happen over the course of 10 years, right? And you want to go and calculate it. So you have I equals PRT. Just a refresher, I means the interest that you made. So it's, hey, you know, I put this money away for a little bit of time. Here's the interest I made on that, just for that money sitting there. The P is our principal. What did we start with? Our starting amount, our original amount. Our R is always written as a decimal. It is our rate. And T is our time. With percents, it's a little tricky, right? You want to remember that you can't just type in a percent into a calculator. You always have to remember a decimal. So now, let's take a look at a couple of other formulas. So we have tax. Actually, you know what? Even better. Let's try and refresh. What uses addition versus what uses subtraction? I know that tax and tip are things I have to do in addition, right? I have to add that percent from there. And then subtraction, I know there's discount. I'm saving an amount. Oops. There we go. Discount. And then markup, right? Take the percent, multiply it with the amount, and then I add that amount. Remember, this is just a refresher. So if you're struggling with these little concepts, make sure you ask questions or go back to your notes in your Chapter 6 packet. This is still percents. And then on the side, we have commission. Commission, you go up. But in our formula, we're using multiplication. So be careful when you're taking a look at those. Let's move on to Chapter 7. Now, Chapter 7, you may have to look at your notes or so, but I'm going to take quick notes here. And I'm saying you may have to look at your notes. I'm saying for the diagrams, right? But right now, it's just a review. So we have the word mean. And it's not just like someone's being mean to you. It's mean. It's you're taking the average. The median. Another word for it is the middle. Mode means the most, meaning what number occurs the most often. The range is the difference, right? The largest minus the smallest piece of data. Outlier is like the outsider. It's like, that's why I changed the color so you can kind of visually see it. It's the outsider, right? What piece of data doesn't belong? And then for box and whisker plots, I'm going to draw this for you. Remember, it doesn't have to be completely even when we actually end up drawing it. Okay. Here's our lower extreme, our upper extreme. So this is like the least, and upper is the greatest. Our median right here is right here. It's in the middle. It may not look like it's in the middle between the two dots, but for that data and this box and whisker plot, it is. Then we have our first quartile or our lower quartile. It's in the middle between the lower extreme and the median. And then we also have our third quartile or our upper quartile. Again, if you have any questions about Chapter 6 or 7, go ahead and ask us. We're here to go over it, especially when you're doing the study guide. This way we could answer your questions, even with the mini quiz, before you do your exit slip next class.